Hey everybody, Mary Rose here. Today we're going to talk about who's the boss. Not just who's the boss of you, who's the boss of your book. I'm going to tell you who's not the boss, and I'm going to tell you who is. I think you'll find it useful. See you in a minute. Hey there, everybody. Hey, for those of you that are used to coming live and getting a nice 30-second countdown, I skipped it today. Let's get on. I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about this with y'all today. I'm a little bit stoked about this topic of who's the boss of your book. So hopefully I woke you up a little bit. Lovely to see you all here. Anybody who's here watching live on Facebook, there is this little thing that you can do to let me know who you are, just because I'm using a streaming platform called StreamYard. And so if you go to streamyard.com/Facebook and you just click, it'll let me be able to see who you are. Otherwise, you'll just be Facebook user, and that's cool. You can be Facebook user. You don't need to tell me who you are. But in case I don't call you by name and you're watching from Facebook, it's possible that you just need to do that. All right. But in the meanwhile, Nancy's here. Facebook user is here. Hey, Facebook user. And Nancy's here. And I see I've got a bunch of other people watching live too. That's awesome. So if you are here for the first time, let me just let you know what you're in for. I'm Mary Rose Wood. I'm an author, probably best known for my middle grade fiction, The Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place series, my most recent book, Alice's Farm, which is behind me next to the pot, and many other books as well. And I'm also the founder of Path of the Storyteller, which is my own platform for teaching story structure and writing craft, for mentoring writers, and for helping those of you who take this very important work seriously enough to be here on a Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific to hear me talk about writing craft and story structure, and hopefully to participate in the comments. People like you deserve to be able to write at pro level, to have the resources, the training, and the guidance that you need to get your work to be the way you know it can be. Anybody who's taken the brave plunge from thinking about writing to actually writing knows that there is a kind of a learning curve, a gap, if you will, between what you want to accomplish in your work and how it comes out when you first start to work. There is actually stuff to learn. This is a very complex artistic practice. We don't just fall out of a tree knowing how to write as well as our favorite writers do. They make it look easy, but that's only because we only get to see their final drafts. We only get to see their work when it's, in the bookstores or in the libraries, bound between hardcovers. Our messy first drafts start in a very different place. So I want to help support you on that journey. Hey, Cynthia, great to see you here. Lovely to see a nice group of, dare I say, bosses. You're all the bosses of your books. I want you all to sit up a little straighter, just straighten the spine, feel a little tall, feel a little bit in control. You are the boss of your book. Now, I'm asking you to believe me, but I know that you are also thinking, Mary Rose, I don't actually feel like the boss of my book. I feel like my book might be the boss of me. And I feel like my book might not be a very good boss either. My book might be like a nightmare boss. Well, I want to talk about that today. What do I mean when I say you're the boss of your book? And how many problems can we solve by exploring this idea? So I'm going to talk about who's not the boss of your book, and I'm going to talk about the ways in which you are. All right. In the meantime, I've got the comments open so I can see if you post any questions or comments about our discussion today that you have. Please feel free to share them as we go. I'll either deal with them in the moment or save them to the end. Okay. So I'm really also interested in hearing how this stuff resonates with you. All right. When I say that you're the boss of your book, I'm addressing something that comes up, I think, for many of us at various points in the writing process. We feel overwhelmed. We feel like the tables have been turned. We had an idea for a story, right? We had characters in mind. We had an idea for a plot. We were inspired by a setting. And we decided that we were going to start to write about it. We felt like we were going to be able to, maybe create something based on this inspiration. Maybe we didn't know much about it, but we started in with goodwill, with good intention, right? But we very quickly got to one of the three stages of fear, what I call the three acts of fear, right? I often talk about story structures being in three acts: first act, second act, third act. Well, the fear of our books has three acts as well. There's the fear of the beginning, the fear of the middle, and the fear of the end. So the fear of the beginning is this sense that we just don't quite know how to get started. We have an impulse to write, we have a glimpse of an idea, but we don't have some key information. Like, we have a character, but we just don't have a plot, or we have a plot, but we don't know who it's about, or we have a setting, but we don't know what happens there. We have enough to make us have the longing to write, but we don't have enough to truly begin. So that's a kind of a fear of the beginning. And because we don't think of ourselves as the boss of our books, we accept that as our due. Like, we're like, okay, I just don't know enough to begin. So I'm stuck now. That's it. Fear of the beginning has kind of knocked us out of the game before we even got started. Fear of the middle, the second of the three acts of fear. Fear of the middle is when we've actually gotten through the beginning. Maybe we've written a draft at the beginning. We don't imagine that it's perfect, right? We know that it's going to need revision, but we're just trying to get more words down, because that is what makes us feel like we're writing. When we sit down to work every now and then, we put more words on the page, the story moves forward, and now we feel like we're making progress, because isn't that what writing is? Well, is it? Let's put a little pin in that question. So we get into the middle. We've gotten past the beginning. Now we've got a hero doing something, and we're in the middle. And that's when the fear hits us. We're on a journey, but we don't know where we're going. It's starting to feel repetitive. It's starting to feel like we're stalling. We're like a band playing the same vamp over and over again because the star just has missed the entrance, right? Like, we're just vamping for time, but we don't want to stop. We don't want to stop making progress. We don't want to quit. So we just keep putting words down, but at the same time, we realize that we're not getting anywhere. Because we don't understand that we are the boss of our books, we then start to explain this situation like, well, I've just run out of ideas. I'm just not creative enough. I don't have the talent. I have writer's block, right? These are all the types of things that we might say to ourselves if we get caught up in this fear in the middle. We think that because the steam has run out, that's it. We don't understand that we're the boss of our book, so we don't go to the kettle and turn on the flame. Like, yep, the steam's gone, and that's it. I'm helpless. I'm helpless in the face of this. I don't know where we're going. I've run out. Sometimes this type of fear of the middle will manifest in a self-labeling that we don't have the discipline to write. Look, I wrote 40 pages. I got 50 pages down, but now I've ran out of gas. I just don't have the discipline. No, my friends, what you don't have is the leadership. Leadership comes from the boss. And who's the boss of your book? You are. All right. So that's what it feels like in the middle, right? And now let's talk about the third act of my three acts of fear today. Fear of the end. We can write quite a bit out of stuck stubbornness. We can sort of white knuckle our way almost to the end of a draft. I bet some of you are going to be able to relate to this. And even as we're approaching the end, or what should be the end, we start to panic because we don't really know what the ending is. We had an adventure. We put our characters on an adventure. There have been many experiences, many episodes, if you will. It's almost like one of those TV series that just goes on and on and on, and they keep renewing it season after season, and so they sort of keep building up to an ending that never comes into view because we're not really ready to end it. It's not the ending yet. Maybe we're going to get renewed for another season, and things just get complicated. We keep complicating. We add new characters, we add new plot threads. It just kind of starts to spiral out of control. And so we've got something now that is like, it's like the blob, like it just keeps spreading like an oil slick. And we've written so much. But because we never truly had a clear plan for the end, it's just getting bigger at the exact time that we know we should be starting to rein it in toward a destination. And this, my friends, becomes the fear of the end. We've created a monster, as they say, and we just don't know what to do with it. And those writers will, have a different experience because they've put so much work in already. And the thought of quitting is heartbreaking. And so they will go in circles and circles and circles and circles because they have forgotten that they are the boss of their book. If they don't choose a destination, who is? It's up to them. All right. So let me talk now. So this is what we're trying to solve today. But it manifests in different ways, as you see. We sometimes have our crisis in the beginning, sometimes in the middle, sometimes in the end. It's not that 3 different writers will always have the same experience. You as a writer may have projects that bring you to each of those experiences, right? So that's why I wanted to take a minute to describe them. This is what we're trying to solve. This is what we're going to try to solve today for you. Each of these is solved by remembering that your book has a boss. It's not running the show. Somebody's running the show. I want that somebody to be you, but too often when there is a vacuum of leadership, somebody stands up to say, I'll take charge, and it's not the right boss. It's not always who it should be. So I want to talk for a minute about who's not the boss, because you might already be saying, okay, I got it. Someone's got to take charge, but I just want to make sure that the right boss, the one who has the capacity to lead us to success, is the one who truly ends up sitting in the swivel chair. Okay. All right. So what's not the boss? Number 1, the words are not the boss. What do I mean by that? If you think that the words that you've already put on the page have a right to exist just because you already put them on the page, and you allow them to dictate what can happen next, you have made the words the boss of your book. I am sure that many of you have heard of the very fascinating and very relatable concept of the sunk cost fallacy. We'll take a momentary digression into economics here. So a sunk cost fallacy, if you're not familiar with it, is the way that human beings tend to ascribe value to things based on what has already been invested in them. It's why people will make foolish economic decisions, right? Like they'll buy a stock or a piece of land or something like that, and quickly realize that it's worthless. And instead of cutting their losses and getting out, they just double down. They just They just throw good money after bad. It's very hard to imagine that that something that we've invested time, money, love, and care in was a bad investment. It's cut, that it's smarter to cut your losses and get out. Now, this plays out in the macro and the micro level. Even sometimes, if you've anybody who's ever had a garage sale, not everybody's interested in the stock market, but I bet a lot of you have had a garage sale, and you're like, you have a pair of jeans that you paid $60 for, and so in your mind they're worth $60, and you realize, like, to somebody else, like, a used pair of your old jeans is it may not be worth $60. We tend to falsely ascribe value based on what it cost us. I know what it cost you to make time to write, to sit down every day, to close the door, to get up early, or to find quiet time when your family, was not needing you for that minute, and to put some words on the page. They cost you something, those words. They did. And you're used to them now. You're fond of them. Chances are, if you're struggling to move forward, you've read and reread and reread what you've already written so often that you can recite it by heart. Am I right? Am I right? Is anybody feeling called out? So we naturally put a tremendous value on the words. But experienced writers know that the drafts that we write are process documents. They are sketchbooks. They are exploratory, right? So if we mistake our explorations, which are disposable, they are infinitely malleable. If we mistake them for being the boss of our book, we're in big trouble, because at that point, we can only make decisions that preserve the costs that we have already sunk into this project. And we very, very, very quickly find that it's like a noose. Like we've written ourselves into a corner. Sometimes writers say that we've written ourselves into a corner. Who could possibly put you in a corner but you? Right? Like, what is that corner? The corner is the fact that you wrote words that need to change, and that you haven't made the adjustment in your mind that the words are process documents. They're placeholders. The words you write are placeholders for the finished words, but you're not going to get to the finished words until later. So the words are not the boss of your book. Now, there's a wonderful, very familiar phrase called "murder your darlings." I'm sure a lot of you have heard it. There's a fun story behind where that phrase comes from, blah, 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 blah. We won't go into that today. But the phrase "murder your darlings" is a kind of a shorthand way of saying that you must not overinvest in the words you've already written. Right? The words you've already written, yes, you feel like they're your darlings. That's exactly what I'm talking about. But you have to murder them. A lot of them are going to be cut. Most of them are going to be changed many, many, many times on the way to having a finished book. So what's not the boss of your book? The words are not the boss of your book. Okay? Number 2, luck is not the boss of your book. Now, what do I mean by luck? I mean any random force that you expect to be able to passively receive. And so under the heading of luck, I would also put a belief, an overbelief in talent. Look at my air quotes. That on some level, you believe that the force that is going to determine whether you finish the book, whether the book will be any good, is somehow outside of you. That you are going to randomly receive the finished draft. That as you write, that you're just going to keep going. And if you're lucky and if you have enough talent, the problems of the book are going to solve themselves while you get to be in this kind of passive state. Like if you just sit there long enough, it's going to work. There's another very funny theory. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this image. It's quite comical. It has a name. It's called the infinite monkey theory. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? It's the theory that has been was proposed years ago that if you put an infinite amount of monkeys at an infinite number of typewriters, there was 100% certainty that eventually they would type the entire works of Shakespeare. That's kind of like a thought exercise about the nature of infinity, right? Like if it's an infinite amount of monkeys and an infinite amount of typewriters and you have an infinite amount of time, will they accidentally type the complete works of Shakespeare? Like as a thought exercise, you have to say yes, because it's infinite. Anything is possible, right? if you create that. You, my friend, my dear writer, my dear storyteller, are not an infinite amount of monkeys. You do not have an infinite amount of typewriters, and you do not have an infinite amount of time. Okay. You, in fact, must actively guide the process, right? You must be the boss of it. But this is who is not the boss. An infinite amount of monkeys is not the boss of your book. An endless amount of passive just showing up and exploring is not the boss of your book either. Now, I'm not against exploration. Those of you who know me a little from either being my students in the past or watching these videos, you know that I am an improviser at heart. I actually trained to do comedy improv in my youth, and I performed live on stage. I used to do improv. I loved it. It taught me so much about the creative writing process. So I believe in serendipity. I believe in connecting the dots and surprising oneself. But that is not in and of itself a process that gets you to the end of a book. That is part of your toolkit. That kind of brainstorming, of improvising, of generating material without really knowing in advance how it might fit into the big scheme of things. It's one essential tool in a writer's toolkit. Okay. So I'm not saying that that's not part of it. It is part of it, but it's not the boss of your book. No matter how much time you spend free associating, your book is not going to structure and finish itself. All right. So luck is not the boss. Here's one more thing that's not the boss. The characters are not the boss of your book. The characters that you invented, the fictional made up people, are not the boss of your book. Now, if you are like me and have a kind of an improvisational joy in as part of your writing process, you may experience the feeling of sometimes the characters just kind of running away with the scene, and you're in the flow of writing, and the characters start to feel things and say things and do things that you didn't consciously plan. You didn't sit down with a list of my characters are going to do this in the scene. You're playing around in the scene, you're improvising your way through, and they start to do things. And this is wonderful. This is the correct and fruitful use of this tool, this creative tool that I just described. However, much of what your characters improvise is not going to be useful to you. You are generating material in order to pan for gold. Does that make sense? Not everything you make up because your characters came up with it while you were in the flow is gold. They are generating a lot of material for you. And you have to pan for gold. You have to decide what's useful to you and what isn't. There's an old joke, of course. Obviously I had lots of time spent in the theater as a young creative. It was my first phase of my development as an artist, honestly, and I learned so much from it, and still, as you know, draw from it and reference it a lot. But there was an old joke that about actors in rehearsal, and I was a playwright, right? So I used to laugh at this too, that the actor at rehearsal would have the script and they would look up and they would say to the playwright, oh, my character wouldn't say this. Now, I love actors. I love them. I know we've got at least one here watching live today. You know who you are. But I, as a playwright, this used to make me laugh because it's like, wait a minute, I wrote it. I made these people up, and you're telling me that your character wouldn't say that. I mean, it's a very interesting thing. But that is the relationship that we writers put ourselves in if we decide that our characters, everything that they say is golden and somehow, ordained and we can't change it. It's like, no, no, no. You're the playwright. They're the actors. They have to say the lines you wrote. So just remember that your characters are not the boss of your book. I've got two more things that are not the boss of your book, and I really want you to listen up because these are really important. They've all been important. I hope you're finding this all of benefit. But the last two are really important. Other people's opinions are not the boss of your book. All right. Now, who am I talking about? I'm not just talking about the people in your life that you might have said, oh, I'm writing a book about, truffle pigs and, and that person is, oh, no one's interested in truffle pigs. Like, you know what I mean? We can have exchanges like that. If we share our ideas with the wrong people at the wrong time, they may not even mean any harm. They're just reacting. They're just reacting. And let them react. But it can be a mistake, to try out our ideas on the wrong people because we can never forget what they say. Especially if it comes across to us as negative. They may not have meant it that way. They may just have been giving just a reflexive, like, I'm not interested in truffle pigs. I don't even like truffles, But we will never forget it because our brains are wired that way, alas. And you can ask any writer. You can ask any writer. That they may have gotten a million great reviews, but say, well, what was the worst review you ever got? They can recite it word for word. Like we are wired in our brains to be scanning the environment for danger. So we have a heightened sensitivity to negative things. We have a heightened awareness of things that make us flinch, things that alarm us, things that make us feel endangered, right? Those things go very deep. And they get imprinted, and that doesn't mean anything about you. Doesn't mean that you're neurotic or insecure. It's quite normal. It's quite normal for us all as human beings who have nervous systems that are designed a certain way to have a heightened sensitivity to negative input. It's to keep us safe, right? If somebody, if your cat jumps on your lap, as my cat sometimes does during these live streams, and it feels nice, and I pet the cat, it's easy. It's, but if somebody sticks you with a pin, you jump. Like it's just the way our nervous systems work. So don't judge yourselves. But other people's opinions cannot be the boss of your book. And there's the random comment, from someone that that you mentioned, that maybe you're in a critique group and somebody says, oh, yeah, I think this would work better if it were comedy, like, oh, if they just might say they're just having a day themselves. They're just thinking of things. And then you can't sleep that night because you're like, oh no, I thought it was a drama. Now they think it should be funny, and it's not funny, and I'm not funny, and forget it. Like, right? So the mind easily goes down these holes. But another place where you are going to hear other people's opinions that you cannot let be the boss of your book, I'm not afraid to be controversial here, is all of those wonderful panels, industry events, author talks, author events, editor meetups, all of the things that you, in good faith, as a writer who wants to learn and wants to understand how the industry works and what makes a good book good, you probably seek these out. You may pay for some of them. You make time for some of them. It feels like it's part of pursuing your craft. And in a way it is. But the amount of opinions that you will hear on these panels about what is popular, what people are looking for, particularly the editors in the marketplace, what kind of books are on the rise, what kind of books nobody's interested in, right? These two can create an enormous amount of internal static. And there's good advice out there. And then there's advice that's not meant for you. That's how I'm going to put it. I'm not saying that somebody has an opinion that nobody wants wizard books anymore. Wizards are overplayed. We'll never have another wizard book. If somebody says that on a panel and they have a job in the publishing industry, you know, that's their opinion. But if you've spent the last 2 years working on a wizard book, right, and you let that opinion become the boss of you and your book, you see how this can become a problem. I hope I've made my point. You have to have the courage of your convictions. Do not let other people's opinions, even if those people are industry professionals, become the boss of your book. They can be interesting information for you to sort through and decide for yourself whether it applies to you or not, but do not let them be the boss. And the last thing that's not the boss of your book, somewhat related, I'm going to say it, your internal voices of resistance are not the boss of your book. Now, for anybody out there on all of YouTube, I understand there are like 2 billion people who use YouTube every day. So it's not quite an infinite amount of monkeys at an infinite amount of laptops and phones, but close, right? If one of you 2 billion people has no internal voices of resistance, I salute you and I admire you. But the rest of us, you know what I mean. Those internal voices of resistance are the ones that take all of these other concepts that I've already been through, all of the things that are not the boss of your book, and kind of turns them into a scolding, gremlin, some kind of version of your own inner voice. It almost sort of sounds like you, but it's not, right? It's what you've put up internally in opposition to yourself that says all of the things that I've just articulated. You don't have the talent to do this. You don't have the discipline to do this. You remember that panel? They told you nobody's looking for books like yours anymore. Why are you wasting your time? You wrote all these words and now you're just going to throw them all away, right? Like all of the things that are not the boss of your book can be fodder for your own internal voices of resistance. All right. Now you need to find your way, as we all do, of making peace with the fact that that voice is playing in your head some of the time, like a radio. Remember radios? I remember radios. I also remember 8-track tapes. I remember a lot of things that some of you might not remember. That voice is playing all the time, and you are the boss of that voice, right? Maybe you can't turn it off, but boy, you can adjust the volume. You can adjust the volume. So do not let the internal voices of resistance that you may have become the boss of your book. All right. So now, who is the boss? Well, you know by now what the answer is. You are the boss of your book. So the question that remains is, what makes a good boss? Now, I'm going to glance over the comments just for a minute. You guys are posting lots of comments, which is wonderful. What makes a good boss? You've all had bosses. We've all had bosses in our day, right? I've been sort of self-employed for a long time now as a writer, like as a freelance creative, but I had plenty of bosses in my day. What makes a good boss? You know what makes a bad boss, right? What makes a good boss? I'm going to tell you what makes a good boss, because if you're going to be the boss of your book, you have to be a good boss. Number one, a good boss leads. They lead. They don't throw up their hands and say, I don't know. They have a plan. They make decisions. They may change the plan if it turns out that the plan needs changing. And they will very likely continue to make new decisions as more information becomes available. But they have a plan. There is a goal. They gather the team and they say, here's the project. This is what we're going to do. We're going to run the best ice cream store in town. We're going to publish a magazine on the first of the month. We're going to invent a cool new gadget that I don't know, that allows people to talk on YouTube and StreamYard on YouTube and Facebook at the same time. We're going to invent a cool new piece of software that does that. Like, whatever it is, there's a purpose. People are not showing up to work to just say, what should we do today? We don't know. We just all showed up. We just all showed up for work today, reporting for duty, but there is no duty. There is no plan. No, that's not how it works. The boss has a plan. The team has a mission. There's something that you're supposed to be doing, and the boss leads. The boss knows what the plan is and communicates it clearly and can shift a strategy as needed because the boss knows where we're going. All right. So a boss leads, a boss has a plan. Now, when we're talking about you being the boss of your book, what does it mean to have a plan? Now, I hope some of you were at the live stream that I did about being able to say what your book is about in one sentence. If you haven't watched that talk, I highly recommend it. That's what I mean. You have to know, as the boss of your book, what the story you're telling is. You have to have a clear and concise understanding of the story that you're telling. And that is the plan that you are the boss of. And your responsibility as the boss is to make sure that destination, that final deliverable, as they say in business, it gets executed, that it gets done, that the goal is achieved. I'm going to take a sip of water because one of the things that bosses do is give inspiring speeches. So I'm in practice right now. All right. So a boss leads, and the only way you can lead people anywhere is to have a destination, right? So the boss has a plan. So that's the first quality of a good boss. Second quality of a good boss that I want you to be is a good boss takes action. And as a corollary to that, a good boss inspires action in others. So a good boss takes action and inspires action in others. Now, what does this mean for you as the boss of your book? Two things. You take action. You take action by looking at your calendar and figuring out when you're going to actually sit down to work. You take action by being true to your commitment to spend even a little bit of time working on your writing. Maybe it's 15 minutes. Maybe it's half an hour. Maybe it's spread over a few days during the week. Maybe you can grab an hour in the morning, 3 days out of the week. Maybe your work week is so slammed that you are like, nope, Saturday's my writing day. I clear the decks and I get up early and I write from 8 to 12 every Saturday. That's a writing schedule. That's absolutely a writing schedule. It's the schedule that you design because you are the boss that lets you know what action you're committed to taking. All right. And so that is part of you taking action as the boss of your book. All right. But what does it mean to inspire action in others? Well, I'm stretching this imagery a little bit, but I think it makes perfect sense. One of the things that writers who is sorry, I just got very distracted by a comment that came in. That's wonderful. Terry just made me laugh, distracted me a little bit. So you are the boss of yourself taking action. But one of the problems that manifests in our drafts when a writer is not engaged in this feeling of active empowerment, of being in charge, of sort of owning their level of responsibility and leadership for everything that happens both in the book and in their own writing process, is that the hero of their story may become a kind of an avatar for their own passivity. What do I mean by that? A passive hero is what I mean. A writer, let me get a little meta for you. A writer who is in a kind of a passive relationship to their book. In other words, they have not yet seized the reins. They have not yet announced to themselves that they are the boss of their book. And so they're drafting, but in this state of like, I'm not really sure. Maybe if I just keep going on my infinite number of typewriters, things will become clearer. Maybe if I let the characters be in charge for a while, they'll think of something. One of the things that those writers will tend to create is a very passive hero, a hero who has no mission, right? A plot that has no destination. A lot of stuff, a lot of material can get generated in that state. But the writer is eventually going to need some infusion of leadership to keep the pages going, to keep the book moving forward, even though it's not really moving forward in a way that's going to ultimately be useful to them. But they don't want to give up that feeling of, oh no, I wrote 3 pages this week, I wrote 5 pages this week. But they're really vamping without a direction. Leadership is like, if in a vacuum of leadership, someone's going to step up, right? And so in a vacuum of leadership, who tends to step up in a draft that's being created under those adverse conditions? It's going to be a sidekick character, some secondary character who chances are is like, maybe you might even say like, oh, my hero's okay, but this other secondary character, that's really my favorite character in the book. Like, beware of that character, right? Because that character is trying to take over. That character is like the ambitious, like low-level executive who's secretly scheming to become the boss. You may find yourself unconsciously letting some secondary character show up in scene after scene, drop lots of witty banter, turn to the hero and say, hey, I know what we should do next. And your hero, who at this point is probably like just in a neurotic funk of whatever problem you've given them to deal with, they will be only too willing to follow. Now, I say this with a lot of confidence, and I just want you guys to remember that not only have I been writing for a very long time, we're talking decades, but I have been teaching and working with developing writers for a very long time. And so I have seen the patterns of the kinds of outputs, if you will, that happen at different stages of writers' developments, right? And this is not to make anybody feel not special, but a writer who is still grappling with how to have a clear sense of what the book is about, putting the hero on a singular mission, really understanding story structure and making themselves the boss of this book so that it actually does all those things. This is one of the stages of the journey that they will be on, is that they may get stuck and, alas, waste a great deal of time kind of fumphing around a manuscript that will never get finished, where it's just become an exercise in passive hero who has no mission. The plot is vague, if at all, and yet they don't want to stop writing. So the secondary characters start to come in like distractions, like just trying to keep it all up in the air for a little while longer. Eventually, these drafts will peter out, and those writers will feel pretty bad. And hopefully, then they'll seek out some training and mentorship, and find a YouTube channel that inspires them to do differently, and take it all on up. But this is a very recognizable kind of pitfall that writers fall in. So if it feels familiar, know that I love you, and that you're not alone, and it's not an indicator of any of those negative labels that your inner voices of resistance might be putting on you. It has nothing to do with luck, talent, any of that other stuff. It's basically a story structure problem, right? So that's what I mean when I say a good boss takes action and inspires action in others. You, as the boss of your book, will do the same. You will take action to actually get your writing done. You're going to do it, but you are also going to inspire action in your hero. You are not going to settle for a passive hero who is not the boss of the story. Your hero drives the bus. The story is an expression of your hero's active attempts to accomplish their mission. They are not passively sitting in your fictional world waiting for the mission to come to them. It's the opposite. All right. So a good boss takes action and inspires action in others. What else does a good boss do? A good boss is resilient in the face of setbacks. When you are part of a team and things go wrong, something doesn't go the way planned, unexpected obstacle rises up, and everybody looks to the boss to see what to do. Does the boss say, I give up? I don't know. I wasn't expecting this to happen. I think this is done. We failed. That's not a good boss. That's not a good boss. It's the boss's job to be resilient in the face of setbacks. And you must be a good boss to your book, and you must be resilient in the face of setbacks. You may discover that you spent 2 weeks writing a chapter that later on, it just doesn't belong in the book, and you're going to cut it, and you're not going to fall into despair about it. You're going to do what needs to be done and carry on. Your writing schedule may get interrupted. Somebody might get sick. Maybe you have to move. Maybe there's some distraction in your life that means I don't have time to write it all for like weeks. You will be resilient. It will come back. It's okay. You have to be the kind of resilient boss to yourself and your book that you would wish for if you were part of a team and things started to go wrong. And you all looked for leadership to the person who was going to say, okay, you're right. This is not what we were hoping was going to happen. These conditions are not ideal. That being the case, let's change our strategy a little bit and carry on. That's the kind of boss you have to be to your book. And here's the last thing that I wanted to mention about a good boss. And if you've ever had a bad boss, you know this is true. A good boss is realistic about resources. And when I say resources, I mean all the kinds of resources that are required to fuel human endeavor: time, money, physical energy, mental attention. These are not infinite resources. They are limited resources. And a good boss is realistic about them, right? And here's an example of how that might play out in a workplace. What if you have a boss who lays out this ambitious project, and you're all looking at it, and everybody's thinking, okay, that's at least 6 months of work, and the boss says, okay, and it's due by the end of next week. It's not realistic. You already know how long it's going to take to do whatever it is that their plan is. To be put under the kind of pressure of delivering finished product, right? Finished projects without a realistic understanding of the resources required is a recipe for terrible stress and ultimate failure. What if you want to build a house? What if that's it, and you're building a house for a client who is the boss, and you say, okay, this is what it's going to cost to build this. I need the materials. I need this many hours of labor. I need to, and they say, fine, I'm going to give you half of that money, but you still have to build it. No, it's not going to work. You need the appropriate amount of resources to do the thing you set out to do. So a good boss is realistic about resources. and is willing to invest what is necessary, right? And how does this impact us as the bosses of our books? We may be very unrealistic when we start out, and it may just be because we don't know any better. That's fine, but then we have to accept reality. We must be very realistic about how much time it takes both to do the work and to master the work. We may think unrealistically, if I can read a book in a weekend, surely I can write one in 30 days, right? We may unrealistically think that as long as we've written a complete draft, that we're 90% of the way there. Yeah, I know. Writers revise their drafts. Well, I'm pretty good with grammar and punctuation, so my draft is not going to need that much correction. You may have a very unrealistic expectation of what it means to revise. You may not have the training or the information that you need to really understand how to keep your book on the straight and narrow of a hero on a mission, to actually conceive of a book that has the kind of clarity that a well-structured narrative needs. You may still be in a kind of a naive understanding, and I'm not saying this with judgment because we all start out this way. You may still have a kind of naive understanding of what goes into a book. You may think that it just is everything that I think of. I write it down, and when it gets long enough, it's a finished book. I mean, I'm exaggerating because that's obviously a highly naive way of going about it. But if not that, what? If not that, are you clear about how story structure works? Are you disciplined enough to have a map for how a good story is structured, and then understand that you only include what's on that map? You don't have to include all these other things that are not directly pertinent to getting your hero to their mission. It is a shock sometimes because good writing feels so lifelike. It's a shock to remember that it is an art form and it is artificial. It is artifice. It is something that we created and designed to have a certain impact on the reader, to be a certain type of experience for the reader. It gives the illusion of real life, perhaps, if we've done a great job. But if we really look at it as a thing that's made, it's extremely disciplined. It's very narrow. We've chosen what goes in the frame, and so our readers have this experience, and the experience, kind of like a tuning fork will vibrate if the right note is played. We are creating this narrow, precisely tuned experience that, if we do our jobs right, it's going to vibrate in the minds of the reader and imply a world outside the borders. It's going to imply all of life outside the frame. But that implication is the end result of impeccable storytelling and writing craft. It doesn't mean that we have to put everything we think of inside the frame. The more we jam inside the frame, the more cluttered and meaningless it becomes to the reader. We choose, what is this painting about? It's the Mona Lisa. It's the Last Supper. It's the girl with a pearl earring. It's one thing, it's sort of one thing. And yet, if we do a beautiful job creating that highly curated, disciplined work of art, it resonates outside the frame. And that's what makes art work. That's what makes art wonderful. I use these images because it's sort of easy to describe, but I want you to know that as writers, as storytellers, that is exactly how we must think of our work. We must think of it as having all of the craft and discipline and discernment, this highly curated quality that is evident to see with the naked eye when we look at a painting. That's about one thing. Our book is about one thing too. It truly is. And everything else is just outside the frame resonating with it. And so our reader feels as if we've given them a glimpse of an entire alternate universe. Right. And now, and this is true, and it's sort of easy to offer it up as a counterexample. This is true even in very large scale books that weave in subplots and have epic worlds and multiple volumes. That ultimately they are going to be about one thing. Even something as sprawling, and I want to say unfinished, and I'm tempted to say unfinishable, as a very, very popular series of books that Game of Thrones was based on. It's about one thing. There's a land, and there are several different parties vying for power. It's just a struggle for power. That's all it is. It's all about one thing. Various factions are vying for power. It is a Game of Thrones. It is about the throne. It is the one thing. So that's my single counterexample. We could talk more. All right, very good, guys. I'm going to turn my attention to the comments just to see how this is landing with you guys. I absolutely hope that it's been of benefit. And I see, very good. Okay, Nancy, I want to bring this up because I think people are going to relate this comment. Nancy says, my secondary characters often seem to be my favorite. I was wondering why. Now I know why. So interesting. Oh, Nancy, I'm so glad that you had that little epiphany. It is a very interesting thing to ponder. I'm very, it takes an open mind, like a good, the right kind of mindset, right? A growth-oriented mindset to be able to hear a piece of information and immediately recognize it, see it in your own work, and like just being willing to process it. So that's wonderful. Cynthia's here also and says the same thing. Okay, now you guys, you see what I'm saying? This is like a pattern, right? That writers have to kind of go through as they develop. Now let's see. Terry's asked a question that she's saying I've already answered. I'll just pop it up, Terry, in case anybody else has that same question. And what Terry asks is, do we need to know the missions of our secondary characters? The main character's mission may be clear, but do the secondary characters, while acting as shapeshifters, mentors, etc., and I see you've sort of finished this. In other words, the secondary characters are adding archetypal energy to the main character's journey. That's what Terry means when she references archetypes like shapeshifter and mentor. But do their missions as characters serve the story? So whether the secondary characters have missions is the gist of this question. And Terry's saying I already answered it. And so she heard me talking about the book, a well-structured book sort of being about one thing. So Terry, obviously, right, I'm glad I mentioned Game of Thrones. I don't know if that's even something you're familiar with. You don't need to be to understand the point. Because the point is this, even in a book that has a more complicated structure, a more epic structure where there might be multiple narratives woven together, there's tremendous clarity about what the story is about, And so if you've got multiple characters who look like they may have missions of their own, just make sure that what you've created is a coherent structure in which it's all sort of pointing in the same direction. I'll use two examples, both animal stories, and then we'll wrap up for today. I know that I sometimes mention Charlotte's Web because it's got so much exemplary story structure going on. This is a children's book that can be read with absolute pleasure and comprehension by a third grader, but it is an incredibly sophisticated structure. And the mission of Charlotte's Web is to save the life of Wilbur the pig. Now, Wilbur, nobody wants Wilbur to live more than Wilbur. He is primarily the hero of the story, and that is the mission, and the whole book is about that. But at various points in the book, other characters sort of take on this mission and perform valuable service toward it. When the book opens, the little 8-year-old girl, Fern, is kind of wearing the mask of hero, and she performs the first series of actions right? She's the boss of herself, as only an 8-year-old girl can be. And she performs some valuable actions that save Wilbur's life. The first time Wilbur's life is saved is on page 1 of that book, right? And then Wilbur gets involved with saving his own life, but then other characters get involved with saving Wilbur's life, most memorably the incredible, iconic character of Charlotte the Spider, who then takes it on. And so you may see that, well, you could say, well, doesn't Charlotte have a mission? Didn't Fern have a mission? Doesn't Wilbur have a mission, right? Which one is the secondary character? Which one is the hero? In a complex structure, you can play with stuff like this, but the mission is the same. Just as in Game of Thrones, the mission is to get the throne. It's just that there are different characters vying for it. And it's a sprawling work, and some would argue too sprawling. Even the author's having a hard time finishing it, right? This is an example of something that kind of someone needed to be the boss of this series, right? So I'm not going to throw shade on success because that's never a useful practice. But it's sprawling. It's taking a long time to satisfy the readers on that one. Charlotte's Web does the same thing. And my own book, Alice's Farm, for those of you that have read it, is a story of a farm. And Alice is the hero of the book, without question in my mind. She's a cottontail rabbit. And she has to do something that no rabbit has ever done before, which is to not only tolerate the presence of farmers, and of course, rabbits and farmers are eternal enemies, not only tolerate the presence of new farmers on the land, but help them, because if she recognizes that if they fail, that farmers and rabbits alike will lose their home, and then actually become a farmer herself. She goes on a huge journey of transformation in pursuit of a mission, but a significant portion of the book is also exploring the experience of the farm family, of the human family, and the son of that family, his name is Carl, gets to say, he sort of takes on the same mission. He too wants to save the farm. This is a place he didn't want to live. He's a Brooklyn boy. He didn't want to leave the city, but now that he's there, he doesn't want to lose it. And so he too takes on the mission of saving the farm. And so, like Charlotte's Web, it involves different characters who kind of like a baton relay race, where they pass the baton of the mission to each other. So that's a little bit of a going into some nuances of how that kind of structure can work. A structure that feels like different characters have mission, but you see, it's not always as it first appears, because a well-structured book, you're going to see that these missions line up. They may be the same mission. They may be variations of the same mission. All right. I'm going to make one last check for questions. I'm going to end. Jaren has asked a really provocative question. I know we're a little bit over time, but I don't want to ignore this. So let's just pull this up, and I'll try to be concise, Jaren. If I already have a passive hero, can I fix that by designating the secondary character who fills the void as the new hero? See, this is such a great question. I'm sure some of you have thought of this. Like, I wrote a book, and the main character turned out to be interesting. Not as interesting as I hope, but I came up with this other character who's like super interesting. Why don't I just make the book about them? Now, here's the thing the question I would ask you to pose, Jaren. The story that you're telling, if you've really thought about it, is a bespoke suit of adventure. It is not an off-the-rack garment that anybody could wear, you know? And what that means is that if you take a hero and you've developed a story that's based on the journey of transformation of that hero, then the chances of that journey, that custom tailored suit fitting another character precisely, are very limited. They're very small odds. And you would need, if you decided to write a story about a different character that you invented, you would need to go back to the drawing board in the sense of figuring out what that character's need for transformation would be. All right. There are many, many interesting characters in The Hobbit, right? The secondary cast is so rich with characters that one would be happy to read a book about any one of them. But the story of The Hobbit is the story of Bilbo Baggins, basically, you know, having a huge internal shift, turning into a very different sort of hobbit than he was at the beginning. and then, ultimately overcoming not only his own personal materialistic hobbit-like tendency toward conventionality and accumulation of goods, but solving that problem in the outer world as well. It's why it's such a great example of story structure. It sends the hero on a journey that's so precise. If you picked Gandalf and you said, "Oh, I think Gandalf's a more interesting character. Let me just make Gandalf the main character." That's not the journey Gandalf needs to go on. You see what I'm saying? Gandalf is not a little conventional hobbit who needs to unravel his own tendency toward greed and social status. He's got a whole different set of problems. So if you wanted to make Gandalf the main character of a book, it's a different story completely. But I would suggest, Jaren, that this is a question. I'm going to put the original question back up, and then we'll say farewell. This is a question that, in a way, is making the words that you've already written the boss of your book. Because you're saying, if I already have a passive hero, can I fix that by designating the secondary character, etc.? Jaren, you're the boss of your book. If your hero is passive, fix it. Rewrite it. Throw out what you've written and rewrite it with the active hero. Make that hero active. And if you don't know what that hero's mission is, guess whose job it is to know? You get to know. You get to figure it out. And then you get to design the exact custom tailored story that hero is going to go on. And if you need a little support with that, go watch the talk that I did about being able to say what your story is about in one sentence. I think you'll find it helpful. Okay? I hope that's of benefit. All right, guys, thank you for hanging out a little extra with me today. It was a good topic. You are all the bosses of your books. All right? So for the rest of today, if somebody addresses you, you can say, you can call me boss. Just call me boss today. I'm the boss of my book. Be the bosses of your books. Do what needs to be done to finish them and to make them wonderful. And if you find yourself, speaking of bosses needing resources, if you find yourself in need of more resources, if you need more guidance about how to do a good job with your book, how to structure the story, how to use the tools of writing craft and story structure to allow you to be a good boss who can lead your book to the finish line, please come join my mailing list at www.pathofthestoryteller.com. I'm super excited to be gearing up now, ramping up to enrolling the fall cohort of the Path of the Storyteller training program. I'm going to be opening up enrollment in August. The program starts in early September, and it's a full semester-long program. The first half is all about story structure. The second half is all about writing craft. I like to think of it as an MFA in one semester. You will end up with a toolbox with all the tools you need to be able to troubleshoot your own books. I very much believe in teaching a writer to fish so they can fish forever. All right. And by fish, I mean write beautifully. So come check it out. Join the mailing list so that you get all the deets on that. Okay. Visit the website, get on the mailing list. And please, if you're watching the replay, you have questions or things you want to share about this talk, leave them in the comments. I will see them and I will answer. I'm super excited to find out what you guys think about being the boss of your books. I hope it's a responsibility that you're ready to take on gladly and with confidence, because that's what a boss needs. You need to be confident. Thank you so much for your participation today. I will see you next time.